Hi everyone, my name is Lyndsey Gillespie. I am a senior at USF in the graphic arts program, and I am here to present Hilma af Klint to you all. So, Hilma af Klint was a Swedish artist born in Karlberg Castle, Stockholm on October 26th, 1862. She died the same year as Kandinsky and Mondrian, 1944. She was one of the pioneers of pure abstraction. She explored this language years before Kandinsky proclaimed himself as the father of pure abstraction. We must talk about why much of the art world has not heard about her before 2018. From 2018 to 2019, she had a show exhibited at the Guggenheim. The Guggenheim took the opportunity. They saw in her writings that she envisioned the museum's architectural blueprints before the blueprints were ever conceived. The Guggenheim was the temple for the body of work titled The Paintings for the Temple, which she completed in 1915. Af Klint should be considered the mother of pure abstraction, starting her practices in 1906. Kandinsky, in all his glory, announced the date of his discovery in 1910. He proclaimed himself as the father of abstraction. As at this time, there was little room for growth for women in the realm of the arts. Most contemporaries of Sweden and most of Western Europe were well versed in spiritualism, however. The theosophical community at this time was largely run by women. Theosophy is the study and practice of many philosophies that focus on what it means to gain the knowledge of spirituality. This gave Hilma the opportunity to organize a spiritual seance group called DeFem, the Five. Although Af Klint pulled from a multitude of vocabularies, including botany and anatomy, our connotations of mysticism and sexism have left her on the outside of art history for much too long. This also is compounded by her requesting in will that her spiritual work not to be shown until 20 years after her death. Klint knew that the information left in her work was not meant for the people of her time. There were over 1,500 paintings, 126 annotated notebooks, and over 26,000 pages of research left. Af Klint requested that anything labeled with a plus and a multiply sign, which is her spiritual work, should not be considered or should not be exhibited until 20 years after her death. It took over 70 years before she made it to New York, the so-called Center of Abstraction. The MoMA has discredited her as a true abstractionist because she never showed her abstract work while she was living. We know that is not true. She exhibited her 10 largest paintings in London in 1928, actually writing to the curator of the exhibit a letter wishing her painting safe travels overseas. The threat that she presents, though, on taking away credit from a patriarchal storyline has left many unwilling to take her up on her work. Before delving deeper into her work, let us look more at her background and studies. Klint was born into an aristocratic family of naval officers. She was the esoteric personality of her kin. Hilma's father highly respected her and her artistic endeavors. She studied traditional art making at the Royal Swedish Academy of Fine Arts in Stockholm in 1882 to 1887. Hilma was one of the first generations of women to work alongside male counterparts. She was classically trained and systematically observed nature before she joined the Theosophical Society in 1889. At the same time, she was pursuing research with Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophical movement. Now, as I mentioned before, the contemporaries of her time were all interested in reaching beyond the limits of the physical and visible matter. Let us not forget Kandinsky's interactions with the theosophical conversations around the same time, and his push for expression of visual synesthesia. Synesthesia is a neurological condition in which information meant to stimulate one of your senses stimulates several of your senses. In the case of Kandinsky, he could visualize one sound and would paint those harmonies. This Promethean group of forward-thinking members within the contemporary Swedish society were all investigating spiritualism. In 1886, Heinrich Hertz proved the existence of the electromagnetic waves, and in 1895, X-rays were discovered. The X-ray made it possible to see structures that lie under the surface of the visible world. This sparked interest in the invisible relationships to our world, and has yielded the expansion of our senses. The past century has not been able to delve as deeply into the invisible as Hilma af Klint did, or intended for the future. The creators of her documentary, Beyond the Visible, argue that none of the acclaimed pioneers of abstraction have even been close. She was not limited to one vocabulary or one language, and I personally believe that the way she compiled the multitude of languages within her research is comparative to the Rosetta Stone, and there could be an undeciphered universal spiritual language within. Af Klint believed in the spiritual evolution of humanity. She gave us a way to interpret the meaning of not only science, not only art, not only spirituality, but she also gave us a newly defined language. As languages are tools for communication, Hilma's work gives us the potential to spring towards a new means of interactions and perception. Af Klint's work is that of intense exploration compiled into many series and sub-series. This probes the question, what do we value as a culture? Hopefully the answer may transform into meaning and message. With that tangent aside, Hilma's exploration of meaning is indispensable to the rewriting of art history and truly invaluable to our ever-changing definitions of art. The paintings for the temple consist of 193 paintings created between the years of 1906 and 1915. This included the 10 largest wall-sized canvases, as well as the handmade blue books that she carried around with her. Off Klint and the rest of the 5 channeled the energy of what they called High Master spirits. Hilma was commissioned individually for the paintings for the temple, understanding that it was not her hand and authorship at the forefront, but the gift of knowledge from the spiritual world. Although she surrounded herself with the great minds and artists of her time, she did not show others the paintings for the temple. One person she did share with, however, is Rudolf Steiner. She allowed him to view her 10 largest paintings in her studio, as well as sharing with him photos, sending him photos at his studio, those paintings, her spiritual work. As mentioned before, Steiner founded the anthroposophical movement. This is the philosophy that proposes the existence of an objective, intellectually comprehensive, spiritual world that is accessible to human experience. After the studio visit, Rudolf proceeded to tell her that she should not be practicing like some mystic. After that time, she decided to stop working for a few years, taking care of her mother, and archived those abstractions for a different generation. While she was archiving, Rudolf Steiner kept her photos in his studio and spent his time helping Vasily Kandinsky book his first exhibitions at the MoMA, even while knowing Off Klint had been the first to discover abstraction. How likely is it that Kandinsky saw Off Klint's work in the studio that he visited so often? Surely the work was present and he was aware. After Steiner's negative critique, she decided to explore nature. At this time, she created the handmade book titled Flowers, Mosses, and Lichens. Hilma wanted to find the energetic messages within plants, animals, and trees. It is intriguing to me that within this series, you can see archaic and religious symbolism, showing us the whispered messages that nature shares. After searching the plants, she looked within herself, creating the Atom series. Hilma challenges what we perceive as abstraction and stretches it to visible descriptions of ethereal concepts. Off Klint concluded that we were all made up of multiple spirits, questioning the ways in which we view gender, as well as most secular classifications that are passed down. To give her viewers or readers context, she writes the letters and words pertaining to works by Hilma Off Klint. Within all of her work, she finds an understanding that wherever you look, you can find peaceful polarity. She preserved in her notes and methods a way to blur the barriers of the fragmented and specialized vocabularies that we continually talk in. This may give us a way to end the self-referential cycles of speaking, gently pushing us towards intersectional communication. The Hilma Off Klint Foundation is quoted saying, "There is no evidence that Hilma Off Klint was involved in the abstract art theory developed by her contemporary male colleagues, or that she was in any way involved in the development of early modernism. Despite this, she came up with a similar non-imaginative design language. The contact with the spiritual guides, who both inspired and communicated to her, was for Hilma af Klint as concrete as the 5 common sensory impressions. By visualizing inner processes and experiences, and describing them as accurately as possible, she developed a very personal design language. They continue to say that Hilma af Klint was convinced reality was not limited to the physical dimension, but that there was also an inner world that was just as real as the outer. To convey this message, Hilma af Klint used letters, words, and dualistic symbols to show that everything is a unit. To conclude, Hilma presents us a chance to reevaluate the limitations of art, language, and perception individually, but also as a whole. Lastly, Hilma has written to us saying, "You see everything as formless, and you forget that this is a sign of life. You have to feel with certainty that even the smallest effort to grow in goodness leaves a clear trace inside you. When you do not see an outer result, this must not discourage you or tire you in your efforts." With that, I say thank you, and I hope that this gives you all a foundation to continue exploring her work for that documentary I mentioned, Beyond the Visible. Actually shared, we haven't even started cracking open the spines to most of the archived work she's left behind for us, has gifted us, and I will send a link with this to the documentary as well. With that, really, once again, thank you, and I hope you enjoy your day a little bit more ready to explore your senses and perception, just as Hilma would hope. Alright, bye-bye.